Thanks. You be seated. We are continuing our study in the life of Abraham, walking through the Genesis account. And I'm going to fast forward it to the last couple of weeks. A few weeks ago, Jimmy talked about the idea of three angels visiting Abraham at Mamre, the tree of Mamre. And he cooked them a meal and they fellowshiped together. And then last week we talked about the idea that there's two angels, and there's actually three angels or messengers. One of them is God himself. And we talked about the idea that last week that as those three messengers started to leave, God said, why don't we tell Abraham what we're going to do? And they talked about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we dealt last week with the idea that the issues at Sodom and Gomorrah were both moral and social. Ezekiel lays out the principle that there were a number of social issues happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, and actually the plain cities, which is three other cities in that area. And so there was a moral aspect to it, which you're going to see vividly this morning, and then there's also the social aspect that Ezekiel talked about. And so they share with Abraham that they're going to go down and destroy the cities. Abraham begs with them, starts with 50, gets it all the way down to 10, and realizes God doesn't really have any choice. So that's where we ended our story. This morning we're going to look at it. I'm actually going to use the New King James this morning because the NIV is a little more graphic than I wanted it to be for kids in here. So we're going to try to do a PG-13 version of it. And so the New King James kind of plays that out for us. So here we go. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he arose to meet them. He bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, now here, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, wash your feet, that you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, no, we'll spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly. So they turned to him and entered into his house, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now, before they lay down, the men of Sodom, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot and said, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them carnally. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have two daughters who have not known a man. Lest you bring them out to you, you may do whatever you wish, but only do nothing to these men. Since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we'll deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break the door. But the men, that's talking about the two angels, reached out their hands, pulled Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary, even trying to find the door. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, sons, daughters, whoever you have in the city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the outcry of them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke with his sons-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, get up, get out of this place, the Lord will destroy the city. But to his sons-in-laws, he seemed to be joking. So when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry and said, arise, take your wife, your two daughters that are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his daughters, and the Lord being merciful to him, they brought him out and set him outside of the city. So it came to pass that when they had brought them outside, they said, escape for your life, don't look back, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. And Lot said to them, please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, has increased your mercy, which you have shown to me by saving my life, but I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it's a little one. Please let me escape there, for it is a little one, and my soul shall live. And he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning this thing, and that I will not overtake this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the name of this city was called Zoar. Then the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar, and the Lord rained fire and brimstone down on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. And he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, everything that grew in the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went up early that in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward the land of the plain, and he saw and behold the smoke of the land, which went up like a smoke out of the furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham. And he sent Lot out of the midst of his overthrow, and he overthrew the city in which Lot had dwelt. The rest of the story goes on, and it talks about Lot and his daughters. Basically, what happens is it comes to a point where his daughters actually believe that they do not have a future, so they go in and have children with their father. The text ends up basically telling us in the end that they named those two children Moab and Ben-Ami. To give you an idea of the depravity of the people at the time and even his own family. Moab means son of my father. Ben-Ami means son of my kindred. So it wasn't just simply that there was any shame at all in what they had done. They were actually making it known that this is how it had come. It had come that far. So that's how the chapter ends, by the way. So when you look at this passage, there are all kinds of ways that we can approach it. Let's make sure we understand exactly what's going on, and then we'll talk about things that apply to us as we try to live our life out this week. One of the things that you see in this story is the first thing kind of that stands out is, first of all, 2 angels come into the city, not 3. When we left Abraham, there were 3 angels with Abraham, God himself and 2 angels. In this situation, the 2 angels are the ones who go into the city. Now, what's interesting in this story is that Lot, when they come to the city, they find Lot in the gate of the city. The easiest way to try to explain that is the gate of the city is where all the city business was done. It was kind of like the town hall, if you will, or the city hall or the city council of the city. So all of a sudden now we have found Lot in that position in the city. He's kind of the welcoming committee, if you will, of the people. So these 2 angels, and again, they look like normal people, they come into the city, and at this point, they haven't told them why they are here. In fact, that's not going to happen for a little while. So they come into the city, and Lot meets them, and it's kind of like, hi, how are you? I'm from here, you're from here, okay. What, I don't know what they said, yeah, we're from heaven, but I don't know how that played out. But anyway, so they have this little discussion, and they say, it's starting to get night, and they say, well, we're just going to sleep in the town square. Now, this is going to become very true, even more so when the Mosaic Law is given. But at this point in history, there is actually a responsibility that when someone came into your city, you had to take care of them. You had to provide them safety. So it was not uncommon in this culture that you could just stay in the city square. I mean, the gates would be closed. You would be safe there. People would watch out for you. It would be just they didn't have motels and stuff like that. So it was not uncommon for people to just stay in the city. Not, when I say sleep on the streets, we get bad images of that, but that's kind of what they would do. However, Lot knew that in this city, you didn't want to sleep in the city square at night. So Lot begs them, literally. You can't see it, but in the Hebrew language, Lot actually begs these people, you can't do that here. Come into my house. Now, what happens is when he brings them into his house, now all of a sudden the responsibility for their safety shifts to him. So he brings them into the house, and it's interesting. There's so many rabbit trails I could take in this story. So I'm trying. You have no idea how hard I am trying to stay on track here. Okay, but what's interesting here is he makes them it says a feast, but the focus is unleavened bread. Unleavened bread is something you made really quickly if you weren't planning on anybody. Compare that to the feast that Abraham had for the angel and the messenger. But anyway, so here we go. He makes them this quick thing, and it says then that all of the people started to come out from the city, And what's significant about the story is it says young and old. Here's what that means. This was not just a generational thing. This was a generational thing that had been taught and adapted to everybody. So all of a sudden now you have everyone pressing up against the door saying, we want those guys out here. And Lot is like, no. And what's interesting here is in this story, Lot then closes the door, steps outside with the men. By the way, again, another rabbit trail, really hard for me to not get on this one. Inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside. It's amazing how this all plays out. In the city, out the side, inside the house, outside the house. Lot goes outside the house. He closes the door. And he says, literally to these guys, don't do this wickedness. That word is the same word, the same Hebrew word that God uses when he talks about the wickedness that was in the earth and God destroyed it with a flood. It's the same word. He looks at him and he says, don't do this wickedness. And he begs them not to do that. And then he comes up with a solution. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you my daughter. Now, some of you may get a little confused because it says they're married, not married, married, not married. You need to understand, they were engaged. They had not consummated the marriage. They were engaged, and in that culture, that was considered marriage. So they're unmarried women who are married. They just haven't consummated their marriage yet. They're waiting for that period. So what happens is he comes in and he says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you my two daughters. Now, that seems really harsh to us, and I don't care what the culture says, that's harsh, okay, when you're putting your family before everybody else. But you need to understand that in this culture, there was an obligation to take care of people, their safety. When you brought them into your house, you were responsible for them. So there was an element here of he figured it, but again, the whole thing had been so warped. So what happens is, finally, the men grab Lot, pull him into the house, close the door. This is going to be the first time the men physically grab him. They're going to grab him again and take him out of the city. But they grab him, they bring him inside, and they strike everybody with blindness so they can't even find the door. Now at this point, Lot realizes these are not ordinary men. Something unique about these guys. There's something supernatural about these guys. And then the guys look at him and say, here's why we're here. This place is not going to be on the planet tomorrow. We've come to take you out. What's interesting to me is as they try to, and so they basically tell him, look, you need to get everybody that you know that you can convince in your family and your thing, and let's get out. So Lot goes out and finds his sons-in-laws. And he says, guys, you need to come with us. It is so bad at this point, they think this is a joke. They won't even take their soon-to-be father-in-law seriously. And again, I think sometimes we're hard on Lot. I think when you go to 2 Peter chapter 2, which I want to encourage you to read sometime, because it lays this out in relationship to where we are right now as a country and a nation. And it lays this out to coming judgment. And basically, it says that righteous man Lot vexed his soul day by day. I think Lot's a good guy. But Lot has been tainted by the world in which he lives. And it's to the point, and by the way, even the city people, when he goes out to meet them, they said, look, this foreigner has walked into our world to try to judge us. So even they see an element of righteousness about this guy. I don't want to paint this guy out to be a bad guy. I think he's a good guy who's in a bad situation, and he's made some serious mistakes in his choices. And so Lot finally comes back to the thing, and as they convince him to try to go outside the city, he doesn't listen. Finally, the angels take him and his wife and his two daughters and physically put them up outside of the city. I mean, they don't even have time to get their wallet or a purse or nothing. I think it's significant Because at this point, I believe Lot has acquired wealth and prosperity and things that come with living in Sodom. And he basically goes out with the clothes on his back. And so they plop him outside the city because he's hesitant to leave. And they say, now, you need to get to the mountains as fast as you can. And Lot says, I can't go to the mountains, I'll die out there. You know, I'm a city kid, don't move me to the country. And so the angels basically look at, and so Lot says, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. How about letting me go to Zoar? Now, Zoar was one of the 5 cities that God was going to destroy. It's a little city. And the angels end up making a deal with him and say, okay, we'll let you go to Zoar, but you need to get there fast. It says he gets there to Zoar, and then the angels basically destroy the city. Everything's wiped out. Fire, brimstone, come down, wipe out everything that's there. And then it says that Lot's wife looked back. Now, you and I, when we read the Bible, sometimes we get this idea that it's a glance. This is not a glance, folks. This is I want to go back there. For whatever reason, whether it was friends, relatives, neighbors, whoever else that she was concerned about, she wanted to go back towards Sodom. And at that point, God turns her into a pillar of salt. And the text goes on to say that Abraham gets up the next morning. And Abraham stands there looking out over that valley. And he sees nothing but the smoke of the destruction of all the plain cities that are there. And I cannot help but think in my mind that as Abraham stands there, he stands there with the idea of, could I have done more? Because you have to remember, Abraham actually went and pursued to rescue Lot and all of the people of Sodom earlier. And I can't imagine that on that trip back, these people were not coming up to Abraham saying, thank you for saving us. So the people that were destroyed were people that Abraham would have known. Abraham would have friendships and relationships with. And at this point in the story, Abraham doesn't know if Lot has been wiped out too. So I think there's a little bit of a heavy heart, but it's interesting because the text says, God delivers Lot because of Abraham. Remember Abraham last week pleading over and over again, down to 10? And God saves 4. So, and then you have this tragic story of Lot and his daughters. So you go, okay, so that's a lot of stuff. What do we learn? Here's what we learned for us this week, okay? First of all, make no mistake about it. God is a God who judges. Now, we don't like that. But it really doesn't matter what we like or don't like. But you need to understand this. God is a God of judgment. We're in chapter 20 or so, 1920, in this passage. God's already judged with the flood. God's already judged at the Tower of Babel. God's already judged Adam and Eve by putting them out of the garden. Now God judges the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah and the plain cities because of the moral and spiritual issues. Make no mistake about it, God judges. And we're in a world that we want to talk about the love of God and the happiness of God and rainbows and butterflies and all that stuff. That's great, but you need to understand this. Make no mistake about it. God is a God of judgment. And God will judge. God will make everything right. And do not ever assume that because God is not judging now, that is God's acceptance or God's stamp of blessing or God's stamp of approval, that it's okay. There's not a person in Sodom who knew this was going to happen. They just carrying on their merry way. And that's exactly the way it will happen when God decides to finally judge. There's coming a day, God's going to make it all right. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is not going to be a pretty day. Look, you need to remember this. We look at a cross And we get excited by all that that represents. But do you understand that is a reminder that God is a God who judges? Your sin and mine was judged on the cross. His son went, Jesus Christ goes to the cross so that sin can be judged and paid for. Make no mistake about it. God is a God who judges. And there is coming a day that God is going to make it all right. And listen, I am all about the love of God and the mercy and the grace and the forgiveness of God. But let's make sure we don't gloss over the idea that God is a God of judgment. And he's got a line. And when Sodom and Gomorrah got to the point that they crossed that line, God dealt with them. Second thing you see in the story, God is a God of mercy. You see God, even though he negotiated all the way down, Abraham negotiated all the way down to 10 people, God pulled out 4. In fact, it's interesting in the story, God actually waits until they make it to Zoar. In fact, the angels have to go, come on, let's move it along. Let's go. This needs to happen. And we can't let this happen until you get there, because this is going to be utter annihilation. There ain't going to be anything left. And you have to remember that, and you go, well, I really have a hard time with innocent people, and like, what about the little animals, and, Foo-Foo the dog, and, what about all of that? Make no mistake about it, folks. Sin, the impacts of sin affect innocent people all the time. And you can't, but you see here God's mercy. Even in this situation, God is merciful. And God actually physically takes Lot and his 2 daughters and his wife and plops them outside of the city and says, now let's move. But when Lot's wife, it's interesting, Jesus makes this statement. He's talking about judgment. He says, remember Lot's wife. Be careful that your heart's desire is not for that. And even though God physically picked them up and moved them out and saved them, when Lot's wife said, I'm sorry, but I don't want this, I'm going back there, God said, fine. Then you've made the same choice that they made. Because God will never force you to follow him. It's going to be your choice. You have to put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. No one can do that for you. That's a choice you have to make. And God in his mercy, just as that is a place of judgment, that is a place of mercy and grace and forgiveness that is offered to anyone who will say yes. Third thing that I think I see in this passage is a lesson from the life of Lot. I believe Lot was a good guy. Peter says, he was a righteous man who vexed his soul day by day. But it's interesting, when you dive into the story of Lot, here's what you'll find. You'll see a progression. You'll see earlier in the book of Genesis, it says Lot looked towards Sodom. Then you will see later in the story, Lot pitches his tent towards Sodom. Then you will find Lot living in Sodom. And then you will find Lot in the gate, the center point of the city of Sodom. I think he was trying to change Sodom. But what happened is Sodom changed him. And there is a serious warning for all of us. That's why Jesus says, when he's talking about judgment in the passage, and he says, remember Lot's wife. I think he's saying, look, be careful, because for whatever reason, her heart was drawn back to there. And part of the reason her heart was drawn back to there is because that's where they were living. They were in the middle of it, and they allowed that world to impact them. Abraham, by contrast, is living where? Outside the city. You have to be able to have that influence and that impact, but not allow them the world to impact you. And that's my concern for Christianity. I'm afraid what's happened is we're allowing the world and we're allowing them to set the standard for us. And if we're not careful, we will be like Lot, where things become so warped that we don't even realize what's happened. There's a danger there. There's a danger there. And I want to challenge you, because this is easy, folks. You know, for those of you who are in work environments where you hear people cuss 24/7, my heart goes out to you. I mean, my heart just breaks for you. Because you're exposed to it and you hear it over and over and over and over and over again, and it's very easy to slip into your vocabulary. Our speech is to always be seasoned with grace. We have to be careful here. People are watching. And they're watching to see how real our Christianity is. And I have to say, again, even in this story, when Lot comes out to confront them, they look at him like, who do you think you are, you goody two-shoes? That's all you came in here to do anyway. So he's trying to have some influence, but the truth of the matter is they have influenced him far more than he's influenced them. Because he can't even convince his own sons-in-law to leave. They think he's a joke. That's how, and again, even, it's affected his daughters. It's impacted all of this. So I want to challenge you, be really careful here. Ask yourself, are you making an impact in the world, or is the world impacting you? Because as a Christ follower, I've got to do it differently. The final thing that I see is in the life of Abraham. My heart goes out to Abraham here. Because Abraham, I think, is standing on that hill. Again, I'm just speculating. The Bible doesn't say this. It's just pure speculation from studying the life of Abraham. I think Abraham's standing there thinking, I should have done more. Maybe I should have gone down and gotten Lot and his family. Maybe I should have tried to talk to somebody. Maybe I should have. Again, he had taken this incredible trip to save all of these people. He had invested in these people at Sodom. And now all of a sudden he looks down and there's nothing left. And I think it's breaking his heart as he stands there looking at him going, I wonder if I could have done more. I think that's the biggest lesson for us today. I don't want to shatter the images that you have of heaven. Okay? I think heaven is a incredible place. Revelation gives us a very clear picture of what happens at the end. And depending on whatever you believe about eschatology and end things and all that kind of thing, just let me focus on one thing, and that's at the end of the book. It's called the Great White Throne Judgment. And the Great White Throne Judgment, the Bible is very, very clear. God is going to take everyone who has rejected him, and God is going to make a very careful search to make sure that they have never put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. And God is going to take everyone who has rejected Christ, and it says he's going to cast them into the lake of fire. And death and hell and cast them in the lake of fire. What's interesting is when you read that passage and you go through that and that awesome, horrible, ugly scene, God is a God of judgment. Remember, don't forget that. God's going to make everything right in the end. And this is before he creates a new heaven and a new earth. And God judges in that final judgment, the great white throne judgment, for everyone who's rejected Christ. Here's what it says. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Now wait a minute. If there's no tears in heaven, why are people crying? I don't think there's any tears in the new heaven and the new earth, but that's after this. I'll tell you why, I believe. Because I don't believe I'm going to be able to stand there at that scene and watch people that I could have talked to but didn't. and watch God finally judge. And look at that scene and go, well, I'm just happy I'm in heaven. I believe it's going to break my heart. And I believe the same thing is true for you and I. That if we don't get to the point that we're serious about where this thing ends, and we're serious about sharing Christ with our friends and our loved ones and the people we care about, that we'll stand at that day with tears in our eyes. And I believe that as Abraham is standing there, the thing that's running through his head over and over and over and over and over again is, I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have done more. Don't let that be our story. Don't let that be our story. You have an opportunity to share Christ with people that are specific to the world that you live in. Share Christ. Because there will come a day that you can't or they can't hear it. Right now, you and I have that opportunity. So I want to challenge you, because I think that's the overwhelming lesson here that I see in this story, is this idea that as Abraham stands there, because of him, he doesn't know this yet, but because of him, God did pull Lot out. But he doesn't know that. And I think he's standing there wondering, could I have done more? So I end this morning with this idea. It is my prayer that we each look at the direction of our lives. Carefully look at the choices you're making and the paths they lead you down. Examine your heart before God. Make sure that it is in tune with Him. You never put your faith and trust in Christ. Please trust Him, because there is a day coming that if you have not accepted His judgment of sin at the cross, you will be judged for your sin, and you will pay the price instead of Christ. Live in such a way that you remember Lot's wife. Keep your focus on God this week. Let's pray. Lord, help us. God, we get so wrapped up in our little world that we forget about the big picture. And Lord, many here are burdened for loved ones. Lord, they're praying for them. They're looking for opportunities. I pray that this week you would give them boldness to speak. Lord, for those of us that have put our faith and trust in you, Lord, may we be willing to share you with those around us. Lord, for those here who may not have put their faith and trust in Christ, would you help them to understand this day? That, Lord, you have paid for their sin, but they need to accept you. And Lord, I pray that you would work in their heart as only you can, so that, Lord, they would not have to face you as a God of judgment, but rather, Lord, they can face you as a God of mercy, love, grace, forgiveness. So, Lord, work in our hearts this week and use us. When everything is said and done, Lord, may you be honored and glorified. These things we ask in your name. Amen. Let's stand together and we're going to sing.